What's up, heathens? How ya doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be taking a look at an interview that Alan Parr had with Frank Turek. They're going to be discussing what top 3 arguments Frank uses in order to prove that a God exists, but not just any God, specifically the God of the Bible. And these are going to be arguments that do not include the Bible, but apparently can only point to the Christian God. So I'm very interested to see what these arguments are, because if that is the case, this will be the first time I've heard any argument that doesn't use the Bible that proves the Christian God exists. So if y'all want to fuck around and find out what 3 arguments can be used to prove the Christian God that don't include the Bible, then please stay tuned.
What evidence outside of the Bible do we have that God exists? So excuse me, guys, we're going to start off with the questions about God first. So, all right, I know your Bible says that God exists, but I don't believe in your Bible. So therefore, Mr. Christian,
yeah, good.
Where do you go from there?
So any argument to prove a God, let alone the Christian version of God, should not use the Bible. But what I find from apologists in this particular situation is that if they can't use the Bible, then they use these generic arguments for a general type of deity, and then just logically leap to the conclusion that it proves their particular version of God. I hope Frank doesn't do this. I feel like he's going to do it, though.
That's great. Yeah, and what we do on a college campus, we talk about, that's one of the big questions we talk about, does God exist? And I normally talk about 3 arguments for God, or 3 pieces of evidence for God. The first is that the universe had a beginning, Alan, that there was a beginning to space, time, and matter. And even atheists admit this. I mean, even Stephen Hawking, who was the top physicist in the world until he died about 4 years ago, said this: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. In other words, there was a starting point for space, time, and matter. And so this is not even controversial anymore. People are admitting this.
I can agree with this, that this universe had a beginning. For everything that we can tell about our universe, it inflated at a period of about 13 to 14 billion years ago. I have no problems with assuming this. I just think that it was a natural thing that happened and not some supernatural magical incantation that sprang everything into existence. Also, I feel like the Genesis version of the start of our universe is highly problematic. For one thing, we know that the progression of how the universe expanded and eventually evolved into a state that we find it in today is a very complicated process. Whereas in Genesis, we just have God magically using an incantation to, 1, create the entire universe, and then 2, create living organisms, and only on one particular planet in this vast universe. It seems incredibly inefficient and like I said before, fucking magical. So while I feel like we can agree that the universe did inflate at some point in the past, I don't agree that it requires a supernatural event in order for the universe to inflate.
The only thing that's controversial, Alan, is what caused the beginning, right? And so it seems to me that if space, time, and matter had a beginning, then whatever created space, time, and matter can't be made of space, time, and matter.
You see, that's where he starts his begging the question fallacy right off the bat. Because he says, whatever created space, time, and matter. This kind of assigns some sort of agency to however those things came into being. I don't think that anything created a rain droplet. I think a rain droplet just formed. In the same sense, I think that our universe just inflated by natural means. So right at the beginning here, he's kind of showing his cards with assuming that some agent had to create the universe.
In other words, the cause must transcend space, time, and matter. So the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. You might say, well, why personal? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Impersonal forces don't make choices. Gravity doesn't decide to pull something to the ground, right? It just does it. So the cause of the universe has to be personal.
I highly disagree with his last point there, but also I feel like saying that whatever caused the universe to inflate has to be timeless and spaceless and all that. Those are all assumptions that he is making. I think that whatever thing caused the universe to inflate, it just has to exist not only within our universe, but also prior to the universe's inflation. And that's where the current scientific theory about the inflation of the universe comes into play, because it uses quantum mechanics. Using quantum mechanics, we can explain the inflation of the universe via a quantum scalar field that fluctuated from a false vacuum state into a true vacuum state. And we know that when this happens, an immense amount of energy is released. This release of energy near instantaneously inflated our universe. So when I say that whatever happened to cause our universe to inflate has to exist at least prior to the inflation of the universe, I think quantum mechanics can sufficiently explain this. Of course, Frank Turek automatically goes to some kind of person or thing or consciousness that's needed to make a decision to inflate the universe. But I think just like with rain forming, our universe could have inflated all on its own through natural processes. I don't see anything that needs to be personal about the inflation of the universe. Like he said, gravity doesn't make a personal decision to pull things down. It just happens. Just like with the beginning of the universe or the inflation of the universe, I think that it just happened because that's how the natural process works.
The cause would also have to be intelligent to have a mind in order to make a choice.
Again, it doesn't have to be intelligent because the forces of nature are not intelligent. They just simply are. And the inflation of the universe being just a part of nature would not need any intelligence behind it in order for the universe to inflate.
So I always ask people this question, Alan. I say, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of?
Well, of course, I'm going to think about his particular definition of God because I know that Frank Turek is a Christian apologist. So obviously he's constructed all of these particular points to perfectly describe his version of God. He started with his conclusion that a Christian God exists, and then he figured out all these different points that he thinks describes the initial cause of the universe, and then he puts that out there like he didn't already have the answer in mind. This is classic begging the question. He asks this question knowing that the only answer that you can give is his version of God, regardless of whether the points he brings up are sound.
People will say God. And then they'll say, well, how do you know it's the Christian God? And my answer is, we don't yet. We haven't done enough research yet. I mean, at this point, the creator of the universe could be Allah. But how do we discover if this is Allah or the Christian God?
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad that you're bringing this up because true, even if we were to grant your argument up until this point and we know that some deity exists, we don't know what kind of deity it is. We have no description other than this fuck lives outside our universe and decided to fart and create our existence. And if you'll remember, the original question that Frank is supposed to be answering is, how can we prove God without using the Bible? So let's see how he overcomes this particular problem with his argument.
What we need to do is see the evidence for Jesus's resurrection. And if we look at that evidence, I think we'll realize that Jesus rose from the dead, which means...
Oh, it means fuck all, because Jesus didn't resurrect from the dead. You're supposed to not be using the Bible in order to prove the Christian God. But you start with this generic-ass argument for the existence of God, which doesn't make sense. You have to automatically assume the conclusion to your questions. And then you have to pull out the Bible in order to prove that it's the Christian God. How does this make any kind of sense? It doesn't. It doesn't make sense.
That the same being that created space, matter, and time is the same being in whose human nature walked out of the tomb 1,986 years ago.
Well, yeah, but he didn't. walk out of the tomb. I mean, not even in the gospel accounts did Jesus walk out of the tomb. In one of the accounts, he wasn't even there. There was an angel there that just says, "Oh, Jesus resurrected already." And then another one, an angel, bitch slapped the cover stone away and said, "Jesus is gone, bitches, leave." Other ones, Jesus just appears to the women, telling them to, like the longer ending of Mark, Jesus just appears to the women as they're running away. He doesn't walk out of the tomb. I don't think Jesus needed to walk out of the tomb. Maybe this is a bit of a nitpicky thing that I'm focusing on here with Frank, but the propensity of Christian apologists to relay things that are not in the Bible is rampant in Christian apologetics right now. And it really grates on me whenever they say things that are literally not in the gospel accounts that they say are in the gospel accounts. But no, we can't use the Bible for these arguments to prove that Christian God exists, because the original person that asked the question wanted you not to do that. So we need to try to focus on arguments that are not centered on the Bible, which it seems to ultimately come back to, well, the Bible says.
Right. So in other words, it is the Christian God, but you don't know it just from what we call the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument is the argument from the beginning of the universe.
So what your original answer should actually be, it seems, is that no, you can't prove the Christian God without using the Bible.
The second and third arguments, the second argument is the argument from the design of the universe, that if the universe were slightly different by any one of a number of factors, virtually imperceptibly, Alan, this is called the fine-tuning of the universe, there would be no universe, or there would be no universe that could support life. So the universe appears to be fine-tuned for life to exist and even for chemistry to work.
This is utter bullshit, because he does not know this. In fact, we've done studies on changing up like the cosmological constant, and we have found that we can vary the cosmological constant and still get a universe that is built in a similar way to our universe. But regardless of that, what he's saying is that there are these fine-tuned constants in our universe. And in order to get a universe exactly like ours, those constants have to be those values. And while that's true, he kind of assumes that these constants, one, can change, but also he's only changing the constants. He's not changing the equations. Like, he says that we need these constants to be these values in order for chemistry to work. Well, if another universe popped up with different constants than the equations that we would use in order to understand our reality, like chemistry, like chemical equations, those would also change. So he's only looking at one side of the issue here when he says that these constants can't change or they're invariable. We don't know what other possible values life could exist with our current equations, but even if we were to change those constants, we can also change the equations and how those constants interact with our reality. Basically, what it comes down to is he's assuming a lot of things that are not found in reality. He's assuming things that we don't know. And he has to assume these things in order for his argument to make any kind of fucking sense.
So, and then the third argument is the argument
when you say fine-tuning, do you mean like if the sun is like the distance from the sun to the earth, like if it was further away, or like it has to, it's perfect now, and if something was out of alignment that we wouldn't.
That's part of it.
No, that's not part of it. That's a dumb as fuck statement to make there, Alan. For one thing, the Earth's orbit around the sun normally deviates by about 1 million miles. So saying that if our planet was just slightly closer or just a little out of whack in our orbit around the sun, that, life wouldn't exist here, I think is not exactly being as specific as you should be. If our planet was vastly closer to the sun, would that make a difference in whether or not life could live on this Earth? Obviously it would. Other planets that are orbiting around the sun are closer and they can't support life because it's too hot. If we were farther away, we would be too cold. That's true. But The fact that most apologists out there think that a slight deviation in our orbit around the sun is going to somehow kill all life on this earth or not cause life to even arise, it's just ridiculous. To say that our orbit around the sun is different and therefore life would not arise would mean that we are a completely different planet and not Earth. So it seems to be a moot point to bring up to say, well, if things were different, if things were different, then there would be another star out there where a planet would exist in the Goldilocks zone and a life would arise on that planet eventually. In fact, we found multiple exoplanets that could potentially support life. And of the many billions of planets that exist in the Milky Way galaxy alone, I'm fairly certain we're not the only planet in the Goldilocks zone around a star.
But even from the beginning, let me just give you one fact on this, because this is hard to believe. But Hawking, the atheist, put it this way. He said that if the expansion rate of the universe were different by 1 part in 1,000 million a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. In other words, if the expansion rate at the very beginning was imperceptibly different virtually than it is now, we wouldn't be here. Now, what caused that expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be?
Well, this kind of assumes that our universe is the only universe that exists, and we don't know that. I mean, as far as we can tell, we're the only universe, but that does not preclude other universes from existing, or other universes prior to our universe even existing. To say that he knows that our universe is the only one that's popped up with that particular expansion rate is just ridiculous. We could have multiple universes with that same expansion rate. We could have multiple universes with an infinite amount of variation in the expansion rate beyond what he has said is the standard for, our universe to exist. But he myopically only looks at how our universe is constructed, what our constants are, and what the expansion rate of this universe is, which we're constantly finding out we're actually expanding a lot faster than what we previously thought. So it seems to me like Frank is just talking out of his ass. It seems like he did research on this one particular subject so many years ago, and he's steadfastly held on to these outdated and antiquated ideas about how the universe formed and the forces controlling our universe.
It seems to me the same being that created space, time, and matter is the same being that fine-tuned the expansion rate so we could be here today. So from the very beginning, the universe is fine-tuned, which means you can't say, well, by chance it evolved. No.
Obviously, the constants that are controlling our universe now are the same ones that were there at the inflation of the universe. Although these constants and the physical laws of nature do break down the closer you get to the inflation of the universe. Let's just never mind that right now. Let's focus on our universe being established. True, the constants have always been there, but when we talk about how the constants could change, or the constants or different universes could have different constants, and those universes could potentially support life with different constants, we're not talking about it evolving over time. I don't know anybody that makes that particular argument. If there is somebody out there that makes the argument that the constants have changed and evolved over the course of the lifespan of this universe, then I would have to correct them, say, no, that's not true. He myopically assumes that this universe is the gold standard for other universes, and we simply don't know that that's true.
This is how the expansion rate began at the creation point. And if it were different then or different now, we wouldn't be here. So part of what you said is true, but even from the very beginning, it's true.
He doesn't know that. I mean, I think that the expansion rate doesn't have to be so constant in order for us to still be here. Everything that he assumes is true is shown to not be true.
So the fine tuning shows also that the creator has to be a very intelligent and powerful being in order to fine tune the universe to be as fine-tuned as it is.
I highly disagree with this point too, because I propose that nature, being that nature is not intelligent, nature is it just is. I don't think any intelligence is required for the universe to inflate into existence. So he's just baselessly asserting that an intelligent creator is needed.
And that's just one of about a dozen different things that you can look at and say, if any one of those were imperceptibly different, we wouldn't be here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I think the third.
Yep.
Yeah, the third argument is the moral argument. And the moral argument says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why?
I don't think that there has to be a God, because morals are generated by a mind, specifically our mind. We understand, our interactions with the world around us in these types of ways where we develop a sense of morality. That's just part of being a social species. We see this in other social species too, like chimps and apes and even dogs. They show kind of a sense of morality. So to say that if morality exists in any kind of context, that means that a God exists. It's one of those logical leaps that I was talking about before. He just leaps from morals exist to God exists without building a bridge with evidence.
Because if there is no God, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That would be just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion. But we all know, Alan, those things aren't just a matter of opinion.
They are a matter of opinion, but the thing is that most people agree that Hitler was wrong. Also, whenever the moral argument gets brought up, why is Hitler always seem to be one of the first things that get brought up? Like, apparently atheists can't say that Hitler was a dipshit and a horrible person. I mean, I have a sense of morality whether or not a God exists. I make decisions as to what is moral and immoral myself. So I don't understand this need to be told what is moral. Even as a Christian, like I didn't just sit there and read what the Bible told me was moral and then thought that that was the end all be all. I made my own moral decisions. And the fact that Christianity has changed so much over time and this transcendent set of morals have changed along with the Christians, it seems to me like there is no absolute morality even in Christianity, because God's morals seem to have changed over the past 200, 300 years. Prior to 1865, slavery was fine. It was perfectly fine to own another person. Frank would say that we all know that it's a bad thing to own another person as a slave. You just can't say that and still stick to like a literal reading of the Bible like he does. He's a creationist. He thinks that God created everything, as we've seen in this video. So it just doesn't make any kind of sense to me for him to be like murder is wrong or torturing and killing babies is wrong. Oh, is it now? So you mean to tell me that you're more moral than your own God? Because God has definitely ordered the Israelites to plunge knives and swords into the chests of babies. He's literally done that in your Bible. So are you claiming to be more moral than your God? Then there's no transcendent morality in Christianity.
That it's really wrong to torture babies for fun. It's really wrong to murder people. If that's the case, there must be a standard beyond us.
What standard beyond you? It's definitely not the Christian God. That's for sure. Your Christian God has directly ordered the murder of innocent people. God himself has murdered innocent people, including babies, when he flooded the earth. I know that Christians like Frank Turek would say that, oh, everybody was evil except Noah and his whole family, so God committed them to a life of incest. It seems rather weird to ignore the fact that there were babies that were drowned in the flood and then act like those babies are evil or somehow tainted. Just because they weren't Noah's babies or something like that. It just seems really weird to ignore that fact. Well, that fact of the Bible.
Who is the standard of goodness, righteousness, and justice? And any deviation from that standard is what we would call evil. That standard is what everybody knows to be God.
Well, that's what you say is God. Frank here would think that homosexuality is immoral and evil because it goes against the supposed morality of God. But there are plenty of Christians out there that are fine with the LGBTQ community. They don't think that they're evil or somehow disobeying God by just being themselves. So no, even your particular definition of morality doesn't show a transcendent absolute God to dole this morality out.
If God doesn't exist, you can't say that murder's wrong. You can't say racism's wrong. You can't say slavery's wrong or rape is wrong or theft is wrong. It would be just your opinion.
It kind of seems to me like Christians can't say this if they're claiming that the Bible is a representation of morality or the Bible is somehow a representation of God's goodness. I really don't see that in the Bible, because everything that he just listed was at one time deemed okay by God. So is it just the God of the New Testament, or is it also the God of the Old Testament? Because the God of the Old Testament definitely did a bunch of that shit. He ordered it. He laid down laws that allowed these things. So it seems to me like if you were to apply your Christian version of God, then all of the things that you just listed are okay in certain situations. You have to apply an asterisk to every single one of those. Whereas I think that it's always been wrong to grape a person, or it's always been wrong to own another person as property because it violates their rights. I think that it's always been wrong to do these things.
And yet we know it's not just a matter of opinion. So the interesting thing, Alan, about these three arguments, here's what you get if you unpack these arguments completely. You get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things, and he's moral at the same time. And these are the attributes of the God of the Bible, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet.
Well, that's not exactly true, because you had to open up the Bible in order to prove that Jesus resurrected from the dead. So you already needed to open up the Bible for your first argument to prove the Christian God. It's rather easy in order to use all of these things to prove that your particular version of God exists when you have constructed these things in order to prove that your God exists. He presents these things as if they are independently verified that these are the things that describe the beginning of the universe as well as how we interact as a social species. But he defines morality in terms of the biblical God. So he assumes that the biblical God is the standard for morality in order to say that this first cause or this intelligent creator behind the universe is moral. And then with his first few arguments from the cosmological argument, he crafted those things in order to describe his particular deity. So it's no surprise that all of the things that he laid out to describe his deity would end up describing his deity.
So just from those three arguments, which is called natural theology, that God has revealed himself in two books, the book of nature and the book known as the Bible. Just from the book of nature, we can see a being like God exists without even opening the Bible.
See, I completely disagree with that, because nature is not connected to God. We have yet to see any kind of evidence to make that connection. God is not required for nature to operate. Nature just operates because it's nature, and that's what it does. So until you can build a bridge using evidence between God and nature, nature will never be evidence for God. You know, it's always frustrating to deal with Frank Turek, but when you got Alan Parr and Frank Turek in the same call, well, heathens, that's going to be it for their video today. All in all, I found all these arguments to be very unconvincing. The logical leaps that I said were going to be in these arguments were actually in there. I didn't expect the begging of the question to be so prominently displayed, but I feel like this video is a really good example of how Christian apologists do beg the question and construct their arguments so that they only ever prove their particular deity. And that's horribly dishonest. The fact is that the arguments that Frank Turek brought up are the same arguments that we've always heard. The cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and then the moral argument. None of these prove that a deity exists, but even if they did, None of them prove that the Christian version of God exists. All Frank did was show us how these arguments look to him through his Christian lens. But I would really love to know what you guys think. So if you will, please go down below and leave me a comment with your thoughts on Frank's arguments for God. Do you think that they were good arguments? Do you think that any of them made sense? Let me know in the comments down below. And hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens!